So if you clicked on this video, you actually want to draw beautiful drawings like this with colored pencils. And this is the right choice, because in this video you will actually learn everything you need to know about colored pencils. So let's get straight to the point. First things first, before we start even mentioning colored pencils, we have to speak about the paper. And there's not really much to say about paper, rather than please consider buying thick paper. And how do you even know if it is the right paper or not? So basically, I, for example, have a cover sheet for my paper I used to draw, and you can clearly see that it says 186 grams per square meters. You can go as high as 300 grams per square meter. However, this would actually be for coloring with watercolors. So 150 to 200 grams per square meters are the perfect thickness for your paper to color with colored pencils. And why do I say that? Well, because if you have too thin paper, it can actually break through the paper and ruin the whole process. And trust me, you don't want to spend 10 hours on a drawing for it only to break at the very end. Been there, done that, and well, that hurts. The next thing I want to mention is actually to always clean up your paper, especially if you are done sketching. What do I mean? Well, if you have your drawing right here and you sketch down, and of course, we're all humans, we make mistakes. So we use our eraser and go through our paper, and well, we all know these small little chunks that stay on the paper. And if you want to color with colored pencils and go through one, well, you can actually also ruin your whole process. Also, if you are coloring with colored pencils, there is a chance that tiny little chunks of the pencil are staying on the paper, especially if you are pressing hard. And for example, if you use another color and go over it, you smudge it all and it really doesn't look good. Of course, there are some techniques that are based on that. However, please believe me when I say you want to have your paper sheets clean. And well, this is probably my most important tip. If I only should give you one tip in this whole video, it would be actually to never ever press hard within the first layers. What do I mean? So, with colored pencils, you are basically building up your layers. So this is actually not one pencil or one coloring. I really layered down multiple times over and over again with a darker color and then going brighter and brighter to actually achieve depth in a drawing. So what does that mean? You don't actually go in as a maniac and just basically try to draw that with 3 colored pencils, because actually that will look like a childish drawing. So my most important tip, don't ever press hard or push down hard with your colored pencils within the first layers. Also, I would even go that far that the most beautiful colored pencils drawing, in my opinion, are the drawings where the artists actually never push down hard with their pencils. So yeah, for my next tip, I don't really want to say too much. Please look up on YouTube color theory. I will also do a video on that in the future. However, there are so many great tutorials on YouTube about color theory. And what is an example of color theory? If you have a dark surface and color over it, the color seems to be brighter than usual. Also, color theory mentions how colors interact with each other. So for example, red and green are complementary colors. It is so important to use color theory in your drawings because you do actually add value and contrast to the drawing, which is very appealing to the viewer's eye, and that makes your drawing interesting. Also, another tip I really figured out for myself is that you can actually mix colored pencils with other mediums. And colored pencils actually do very well with alcohol markers. So you probably saw them on the Color Talk trend with coloring all the sketchbooks. But as I said, colored pencils in theory are very good to add details and to add color. However, for a base layer, it is always great to have such a thing as alcohol markers, because you can actually do a whole drawing without markers. However, without a baseline of markers, for example, you really have to add the colors step by step and you really have to work your way up, and it actually costs a lot of time. However, the result always speaks for itself. But for example, in my drawing right here, for a base layer, I actually used these markers. As you can see on the back, they kind of bled through. But for this drawing, for the background, I really do like it. However, it cost me so much time because I actually didn't layer with a marker, but only with colored pencils. And this is exactly the next topic. A big negative for colored pencils is actually that you have to shred through a lot of pencils, and also your wrist hurts. Your wrist hurts a lot, especially after I completed this little drawing right here. I couldn't move my hand for exactly 1 day. Big surfaces with color pencils are not really optimal if you are not considering mixing it with something like markers. But as always, what's a negative can also be a positive. And because colored pencils have such a thin surface you work with, the control you have with these is unmatched. So for example, I also do oil paintings, which you can see right here in the background. And even with the tiniest brush you can find, there's not really that much control and feeling you do have with colored pencils. That's also why I like them so much, and also why I would recommend every beginner to start with colored pencils. And sadly, another big negative for colored pencils, especially for wax-based pencils like this Prismacolor, is actually that they are used up very quickly, especially if you are layering more layers on top and pressing down hard. Because especially wax-based pencils shred down really fast, and they are also really expensive. And it's not like paint that you can mix together your color you want. You actually do need the right color, and that's why white or skin colors always shred down first. And I have to consider buying them in a pack because it is actually cheaper than buying them as single pieces. And if you are wondering what colored pencils I do have in my inventory, this is not sponsored or paid. However, I started off with Prismacolor pencils, which looked like this. As I said, really smooth tip and shreds down really fast. However, it is actually blending really good, and also it is covering up very good. But because they tear down so fast, I actually bought myself polychromos. And I really have to say I'm very happy. But you don't really need to buy expensive colored pencils because there are a lot of cheap pencils. And there are also a lot of good cheap pencils. Like for example, the Ohuhu pencils are also really great, although they are on the cheaper side. However, I figured out that the cheaper the brand or the cheaper the pencils are, the more this grainy look, this grainy textures appears. You really don't get these smooth surfaces as, like for example, right here or right here. It kind of looks a bit grainy, and don't understand me wrong, it actually can look really good and it also can be considered an art style. However, if you want to really smudge colors and blend in colors and try to make it as realistic as possible, I would consider spending a little bit more on these pencils because you will make your life whole much easier. Well, and that's actually all I have to say about colored pencils. I hope this video helped you a lot, and also if you do have questions, please comment them down below. If you want to see my whole art process on these two things, I actually uploaded them on my channel. You can actually check that out, and I would say we'll see us in the next video. Peace.